Japan today is a very modern and peaceful country. And in ancient times, it was not. It endured hundreds and hundreds of years of civil war, which you see in samurai movies. That's what it's about. It's those civil wars that occurred for hundreds of years. And about 800 years ago, there was a clan, the Heike clan. It was in a long contest with the Genji, two clans in a great battle. And this was in western Japan near the Straits of Shimonoseki. It's far to the west. And the Heike clan was destroyed and utterly crushed. And the Genji not only killed the warriors, but killed the women and the children and killed the baby emperor. So they were all killed. And since that time, that area has had many, many strange things occur. There are crabs in the area that everyone says that there are faces on the back of it, and they are the faces of the ancient Heike warriors. And at night, the fishermen claim you can see lights in the distance, and these are the bonfires of the demons of these old warriors that were killed. And so there have been many, many strange things. And in far past, this happened about 800 years ago. And so after about 100 years of this, they built a temple to try and appease the spirits of these fallen warriors. And so they built a temple there and had a tomb, and there was a priest there, and they did all these things, and it calmed the spirits down. But there was always weird things that go on in this area. And there lived in this area of Shimonoseki, a blind man named Hoichi. And he played the biwa, which is like a lute, which didn't really help me. I had to look up what's a lute. But it's basically a small stringed instrument. And he was a biwa player, and this is a person who went around, and because he was blind, this was his profession. He went around and he sang songs and recited stories. And he was trained from an early age to do this. And he was really an exemplary storyteller and biwa player. And so he was became very famous at an early age. And one of the stories he told was a story of the fallen Heike warriors, the battle of these warriors. And he was very poor. He came from a very humble background. But he befriended the priest of the temple that was built there. And the priest eventually gave him a place to stay. And in exchange, all he needed to do was to play, on request for the priest. Pretty good arrangement. And so one summer night, the priest was away, and it was very hot. And so Hoichi sits out on the veranda of the temple, and because it's cooler out there. And the priest and his acolyte have gone away to do some funeral thing or whatever. And so Hoichi is left alone on the veranda. So picture hot summer evening, and he's by himself, a blind man, and he's playing his biwa just to pass the time. And he hears steps coming up. And a voice calls to him, Hoichi. And he's very surprised. He says, and then yells at him in a very stern, gruff way, Hoichi. He says, sir, I am a blind man. I cannot see who addresses me. And he says, and he hears this clank, a heavy step. And it's a clank of armor. And this man addresses him and says, Hoichi, I have come to take you. My lord is a very important man. And you are requested to come and play for him and for his assembly. And so Hoichi is at first terrified, but then realizes, oh, this must be an important person. So he grabs his hand with an iron grip and pulls him down down the path. Of course, he's blind, so he just goes along. And then he's led into what seems like a very, very large palace. He walks across all these floors and into a room, and he can hear a lot of voices talking. Now, in English, you can't really say this, but in Japanese, there are many, many ways of speaking, of what are called honorifics. So you can tell when someone, if you're in the court. You can tell just by the way people are talking and the manner of speech. And so he realizes he must be in the court of a very important, what they call the daimyo, a local warlord. And he is requested, the woman who runs, I forget the name in Japanese. There's basically, he's requested to play this story of the Heiki warriors. And he says, well, it takes a long time to do it. It would take many nights. Which part is most important? And he says, the battle on the beach is the one that is most pitiful. And so he begins to play, and he's a master. He can play and make the sounds of the arrows flying through the air, and his swords clashing, and the men falling in battle. And the people at first are like, oh, this is so beautiful, it's so wonderful that he can play so well. And then when he comes to the battle scenes, they begin to cry and wail. And he describes the death of the young emperor in his mother's arms as they jump from the cliff to save themselves, to kill themselves. And they begin to cry and wail. And he's scared because who are these people that, you know, he's raised this huge emotion. And then the evening ends and he's escorted back, but he's told, we heard you were a master, but you're far more masterful than we even imagined. And our Lord has asked that you come back every evening while he is here. And one condition, you can tell no one where you have been. So he's led back to the temple, and fortunately the priest and his acolyte had come back. They don't notice that he was gone, and so he goes to his room and sleeps, and he was not noticed that he was gone. The second night, the person brings him back to the daimyo to play again in that evening. And he's brought back, but he was found out by accident that he had left. And the priest is very concerned. This is a blind man leaving in the middle of the night. And he wonders, what has happened? And so he confronts him and he says, Hoichi, where have you been? And he said, well, I had some personal business that I had to attend to, and I could do it at no other time. So the priest, instead of getting upset, he's suspicious. He wonders if he's been taken over by an evil spirit. And he says to his acolytes and the servants, he says, watch him. So the next night, this is the third night, the warrior comes to pick up Hoichi and he goes. But it's raining and the servants are running after him. They can't believe how fast, by the time they run down the path, he's gone. They can't find him. And so they search and they go through town and they're looking for him, all the places he normally goes, and they can't find him. And so they're about to give up and they're coming back around the other way and they hear the sound of a biwa in the cemetery. And it's Hoichi singing and playing in front of the tomb of the ancient Heiki warriors. And they grab him and they say, Hoichi-san, come, come. And he says, no, you can't disturb me at this important moment. And eventually they grab him and pick him up and carry him back into the temple. And he wakes up and he realizes, and the priest is very, very stern with him and says, what is going on with you? And he explains what has happened.